Hello friends! It is Catherine Massell here, Master Intuitive Energy Healer, Ascending Earth Creatrix, Spiritual Growth Catalyst, all those things and more. Hello and happy Ascension Assistance Sunday. I'm coming to you live from my business page, Catherine Massell, Ascending Earth Creatrix, and I'm going to share this. I'm going to share this live. Angela is here. Hello, hello. Hello in Austria. I'm going to share this to a couple different places, obviously, as I usually do. And then we're going to get into a really juicy topic, Tammy Lip. And this is going to go right into the Money Lab after this, ladies. So if you want to seek this out again and listen to this again, these lovely ladies, Tammy and Angela, are in the Money Lab, which starts next Saturday at 11:30 a.m. We're going to be doing 4 live support calls. October 13th, October 20th, October 27th, and November 3rd. And since it is a membership group, the Money Lab, I'm going to be doing ongoing support calls. I'm going to do not every week, but probably every other week through the end of December 2018. So your membership gets you ongoing support, resources, tools, mindset exercises, pattern interrupting shifts that you can make in terms of behaviors, feelings, beliefs, doing affirmations. We're going to be doing some really incredible and fun, creative tapping, EFT tapping with affirmations. It's all about money. It's all about money and getting more of it. So let me post this in a few places. And if you're just joining, say hello. I'm going to post on my local page, which I'm starting to get some love on, which is really fun. Lake Tahoe Master Energy Healer is my local page. So if you're listing on that page, welcome. Check me out here locally. Book an appointment, all kinds of fun stuff. Okay, here we go. The cascade effect of listening to your inner critic. Do you know what a cascade effect is? It is like a snowball effect, is another word. So once something gets in motion, once something starts to create some momentum, it kind of brings all other areas of your life into this kind of snowball, this cascade effect of maybe one thing that is kind of running the roost, usually energetically. It kind of infects like a virus all other aspects of your life. So that's a cascade effect. And this is something that's experienced very profoundly when we are talking about the voice of your inner critic, your inner judge. When the inner critic, which only comes from ego, which is only a voice that stems from duality consciousness, this inner critic, when it's allowed to run rampant, it really can only present information to you that is limited to the confines of what has been and what is. So this is purely an empirical perspective based on previous sensory input. In other words, the inner critic, that voice that tends to have that negative Nelly, that Debbie Downer voice within you that's telling you all the time the things, hi Linda, that's telling you all the things you can't do, you shouldn't do, you're not supposed to do that, here's all the bad things that are going to happen if you step into that direction, here's how people are going to judge you, here's how your life's going to start to fall apart, or you won't be able to recognize anything anymore. That's scary. We don't want to do that. That's your inner critic, right? We all have a very felt sense and known sense of the inner critic. So the inner critic only comes to you with information, your inner judge, based on ego experience. So the felt experience, empirical evidence, and the empirical perspective based on previous energy input, previous sensory input. In other words, the inner critic, which is totally based in ego, totally based in duality consciousness, only has the ability to frame the perspective of the future based on what has already been observed and experienced. Okay? The inner critic only operates on, its only MO is to operate on what has been or what is. So based on what comes in with your sensory input, what you can see, what you can taste, touch, smell, hear, what is observable, okay, is all your inner critic is able to base its information on going forward, okay? It only has the ability to frame the perspective of the future based on what has already been observed and experienced. Does everybody get that? Please give me a heart if this makes sense. It has no capacity, your inner critic, to imagine something that has not already been experienced by you or known in the practical sense. Does that make sense? So if you are allowing the inner critic to run the roost, to run the show, in other words, ego is running the show, because the inner critic never is the voice of your higher self. It never is. It is only and ever the voice of ego, of duality consciousness. I am this, I am not that. When I talk about duality consciousness, that's what I'm saying. This constant place of judgment that we're in, especially if we are framing our whole perspective from that of the inner critic, we can only see the duality. I am this, I am not that. So the duality consciousness just keeps stringing together more now moments in alignment with the narrative of the inner critic. I'm going to say that again. When the inner critic is running a show, that negative Nelly, that Debbie Downer voice within you that's telling you all the things you can't do, can't have, aren't allowed to have, don't have permission to get, you're going to get judged if you do, it's fearful, there's dragons there. Don't go there. Fear to tread, okay? That inner critic that's always telling you, no, scary, we don't like it, okay? Which is based in the ego, which is based in duality consciousness. It only has the ability to keep stringing together more now moments, meaning the now is everything. If you've heard me talk before, and especially if you've heard me talk before about manifesting money, I did a video not long ago about that. I highly recommend you listen to that because I talk about a lot of different things that happen when we are manifesting, and particularly manifesting money. The now moment is the only moment where creation occurs. So if you are talking about building a future, you're talking about creating, because you are the creator of your own reality, creating your future, you can only do it in the now moment. But what the problem is with the inner critic, because it's basing all of its information, all of its sensory input about what can be, it can only imagine the future based on what has been or what is, meaning what's observable with empirical evidence of sensory input in your now, okay? But when we are creating, we're taking the now moment that's pristine. We're taking the now moment that's untainted by the inner critic. We're taking the now moment when we are creating that can't even be measured in time because it's not linear. It just is this moment of pure creation where pure creation of being, pure consciousness takes hold. And we create the reality of the next now moment and the next now moment and the next now moment. And if we're stringing together these now moments based on the voice of the inner critic, we're only stringing together a reality based on what has been or what is observable in the now, if that makes sense. I can clear that up. But if you're following the narrative of the inner critic in your daily life, you're listening to this voice daily, you are tuning into this voice daily, you are following the dictates and the actions that this voice is telling you to engage in daily, you have a limited narrative of what can be. You are stuck in the rigid confines of what the inner critic tells you is possible or allowable. So it starts this cascade effect. And since the inner critic only bases reality on what is and has been, because it has been proven to you through past evidence of it, doesn't that sensory input of now go through the filters of what has been? It has to. Because we can't ever build something going forward without having been something before. So it does go through a filter. But it depends on if we are framing our experience of going forward based on that filter or not. Does that make sense? Because we can choose a whole new filter. We can choose a whole new timeline. Let's call that filter a timeline. So if you're making a different choice in the present than what you've made before, maybe even 5 minutes ago, maybe even 2 minutes ago, if you're making a different choice that leans into a different energy, one that is more joyful, one that is more expansive, one that is more self-affirming, if you are making a different choice in that now moment, you are creating a whole different timeline and a whole different filter of your experience. We have trillions upon trillions of different filters of our experience. But in duality consciousness, they come down to filters based on either love or fear. So if you're choosing something, let's just say a filter, aka timeline, that's more self-affirming and feels filled with self-love, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-belief, you are choosing love in that moment instead of fear, which is a whole new filter. And you only know to choose that filter of love because you've had the filter of fear in your past. It's gone through the filter of what has been, which has given you the contrast of, I know what choosing things in alignment with fear feels like. So I don't need that filter anymore. I'm going to mark all those lessons downloaded and complete and choose a whole new filter or framework or timeline of my experience. Does that make sense? So what has been lovingly supplies us with contrast to make different, more self-affirming choices going forward and creating a whole new future timeline based on that. Does that make sense? That's a really good question. Thanks for asking that, Angela. So since the inner critic only bases reality on what is and what has been, because it has been proven to you through past evidence of it, meaning through sensory input, right? Because we love when we are operating from that very, very strict confine of perception of the inner critic. We love to have things proven to us. We love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. The ego loves it. The higher self doesn't need that at all, by the way. The higher self already knows everything there is to know. The higher self is already tuned into multiple potentialities. The higher self perspective is already tuned into infinite possibilities available to you. The higher self doesn't need anything proven to it. But we love, oh my God, we love it. We love it so much from an ego perspective, from an inner critic perspective, to have things proven to us like, let's take money for an example. I'm always poor. I never have enough money to pay my bills, my rent, utilities, whatever it is. And so if that is your belief, the ego loves that validation, and it seeks out, that subconscious ego part of you seeks out validation in your external environment to prove itself right. So it can say, see, yep, this is true. This is what we're operating on. This lack timeline, this lack and scarcity narrative. If we don't have that, who are we then? Then it has to reinvent itself. Then it goes into scramble mode. So the ego loves validation. It will always seek out external validation for whatever you are believing. And if you are actively listening to and engaging with and corroborating the evidence of the inner critic that it so needs for its survival to hang on, it wants to be proven right all the time. And the way we prove ourselves right is often through a lack or scarcity perspective, timeline, perception, whatever you call it, rather than something more self-affirming, like an abundance perspective or prosperity perspective. But just because we're out of practice with that doesn't mean we can't do it. So when this inner critic is getting the evidence of all of your lack, of the stories you keep telling yourself, the memories you have, I've always been poor. Okay, well, if that's what's comfortable for you in believing, then the inner critic, the ego, is just going to seek out more external evidence to prove you right every single time. But it works the other way too. If you start adopting a different filter of your experience, one based in love and self-affirmation, based on the belief truly that you are supported with everything that you need, and you keep looking for this trail of breadcrumbs that proves that correct, guess what you're going to find? But we're so well practiced in playing out these timelines, these stories, perceiving everything through this lack filter instead of an abundance filter. So it's just a matter of practice of switching this around. So when all of this past evidence and future or now evidence is being proven to the inner critic that it can only ever provide you with the ability to create new ways to experience what you already know. Okay? Remember, the inner critic doesn't have any ability to experience or imagine anything that isn't already known. So it literally tethers your imagination about what can be only to what has been or what is. And when I say what is, meaning what is observable and tangible in the 3D physical realm. When in essence, what is might be something that's really abundant, might be something that's really prosperous, might be something that's really self-affirming and allows you to move forward in a more abundant timeline. But if you're so used to seeing through the lens of perception of the inner critic, you're not even going to see that trail of breadcrumbs that leads to more abundance. You literally cannot occupy that energetic, so you're not even seeing it. It's like it's not even there. Does this make sense? So the inner critic can only ever provide you with the ability to create new ways to experience what you already know. Okay? So if you are well practiced at experiencing lack or being painfully aware of the absence of something you want, let's say more money. When the inner critic is perpetually in the driver's seat, you will always be in a place of separation. You will always be in a place of suffering and want. You will always be in a place of separation and the illusion of separation because the inner critic, operating from a vantage point of duality, meaning, again, I am this, I am not that, it only ever allows you to create new ways of experiencing the absence of what you want. Because if you are constantly saying, let's just say again with money, I am poor, I am not wealthy, it's only going to allow you to create, because we're always manifesting, we're always creating, it's only going to allow you to create new ways of experiencing I am poor, I am not wealthy. If you're constantly putting everything in this duality consciousness where we're splitting off from pure source energy, okay? And we are operating from this vantage point of duality. We are only allowed to, with the inner critic, because it can't imagine anything that is part of the infinite potentiality of what can be. It only knows what has been or what is observable in the moment. It can't let us create new ways of experiencing things that are more self-affirming. It only allows us to create new ways of experiencing the absence of what it is that you want. So here's where the cascade effect really kicks in. Perfect sense. Thank you. Okay, Angela. Here's where the cascade effect really kicks in. So from this bloated and misguided perspective, when we give the inner critic this much power then, because literally if we are constantly listening to the voice of the inner critic and we're giving it this much power, we're giving it this much leeway, we're giving it this much of this bulldozing effect so that it's creating this future only based on what has been and what is observable in the moment, we are giving it this really bloated and misguided perspective in all areas of our life. And this is where it really starts to get out of hand. Because we're letting the perspective of ego go gangbusters and wreak havoc in every single aspect of our life. So we start taking on the vibrational burden then of not only our own disinheritance of abundance, our own disenchantment, our own feelings of being disenfranchised from wealth and abundance and prosperity, and from that which is etched into our soul's blueprint, by the way. That's our natural birthright to experience all those things. So we have this vibrational burden then of this illusion. And then we start taking on that feeling in the collective because we're so well versed in that diminishing lower vibration, that vibrational burden of what the inner critic is making us take on, that we start feeling into the collective a lot. Because remember what the inner critic does, it's seeking out external evidence to prove us right, that we are in lack, that we are in scarcity, that we're not abundant, that we're not wealthy. So if it's seeking out external evidence to prove you right, it's going to find it in a lot of different pockets in the collective, because there are a lot of other people who are experiencing these disenfranchising, disinherited feelings as well. So then we have this vibrational burden then, when this cascade effect takes hold, of taking on all the energy in the collective too. And because from this bloated perspective of ego, we take on the lack of friends and family, the collective meaning just strangers, people we might be in line with at the supermarket, co-workers, reading things on social media, maybe something we don't have any connection, meeting someone we don't have any real connection with on social media, but we'll read their post and then we'll get drawn into their drama. We'll get drawn into their disenfranchising feelings as well. So then we take on this incredible vibrational burden then of the collective feelings of lack and scarcity, because we are so well versed in being in that timeline or working on that filter of lack and scarcity, being literally in a place where we're filtering all levels of experience in our life through a filter of lack. This is a massive vibrational burden to take on. And it feels like we can be drowning in this at times, not even realizing that because our commitment to listen to this voice of the inner critic is so strong, that it allows us to sustain a frequency where we're going to just attract, like attracts like. So we're just going to attract everything else that is in that frequency and vibrational range of lack and take that on. And we take it on, and we take it on, and we take it on. And next thing you know, you feel like, I don't even want to try. I don't even want to try to fix my situation. This feels too huge. It feels like we're drowning. It feels like we are literally wearing the burden of a wet woolen coat. It feels so heavy. It's so burdensome. It's so depressing. It's so self-negating. We are feeling this separation. That's why it feels so heavy from the singularity consciousness of the all that is. We feel this profound chasm of disconnection from that which we truly are, which is pure source energy. And we're grasping at anything to help us get back there. But it's always out of desperation when we're in this place of separation. And so it never feels authentic. You know, people listen to Abraham Hicks and then they're like, well, I can't get into that space of just feeling joy, of just feeling happiness. It's because we've gone so far down into the rabbit hole with this vibrational burden of our own lack and scarcity timeline, of listening to the inner critic all the time, and then taking on in the collective everything that's a vibrational match to that in terms of lack and scarcity, that we are so far down the emotional spectrum that it's like we can't even see the light up to something that's like hope or faith or trust. But this is completely self-perpetuated. And I know that's not a nice thing to hear, but it is absolutely true. It is absolutely true. Because if you believe strongly that you are the creator of your reality, you do have the ability to move your way up the emotional spectrum and feel more of a sense of inheritance of your divine birthright and feel more of a feeling of connection to source. It is a choice. But when we are in this place of feeling this kind of this bloated, misguided perspective of ego, we've listened to the inner critic so much that we just don't even hear the voice of our higher self, which, by the way, the ego and the inner critic, everything that's rolled up into duality consciousness is just superimposed over the higher self and the voice of the higher self. So it's always there. It's always talking to us. But here's what happens, because I'm getting ahead of myself here. So we keep listening to this. We feel this burden, this vibrational burden, and it becomes so massive and so colossal until we're so filled up with ideas, feelings, and thoughts about what we don't have, about the absence of something, that we are up to our eyeballs in frustration, separation, confusion, overwhelm, distress, depression, suffering, chaos, and sorrow that we forget. We forget that we are creators of our reality. We forget that the inner critic is purely the voice of ego, and it is just programming that is superimposed over the higher self. The higher self has a voice, and it's always talking to you. But the voice of the ego likes to kick and scream and throw tantrums. It needs to be heard. It has to be heard. The higher self doesn't have that need. The higher self has a voice. It has the ability to be in the driver's seat and in command just as much as the inner critic does. But the higher self, the infinite part of you that is rooted in the one all, the source consciousness, the infinite part of you that is rooted in the singularity, unity consciousness of the all that is, it has no need, like the ego does, to kick and scream and fight and throw tantrums to get noticed, like the ego does. Hi, Camellia. Hi, Svetlana. And this part of you is accessible, the higher self. This part of you is accessible at any given moment of your choosing. So as the creator of your reality, it has to be a conscious free will choice for you to choose the voice of the higher self over the voice of the inner critic, which is always going to be self-affirming. The inner critic is self-negating. So you get to choose which voice you want to listen to. And if you're choosing the voice of the inner critic, it's time for you to go deeper down the rabbit hole and find out why you are choosing the voice of the inner critic. Because maybe it's the voice of a past loved one. Maybe it's the past voice of a husband. Maybe it's the voice of someone who was a guardian or parent when you were a little kid, telling you how bad you were, how unworthy you were, how much you weren't valued. It's time to look at that stuff, because if you're choosing the voice of self-negation over self-affirmation, there's something wrong there that needs to be probed. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be excavated. Nice to see you too, Svetlana. This part of you, this higher self voice, the higher self energetic, is accessible at any given moment of your choosing. And leaning into this energy, listening to this inner voice, will always speak to you of potentiality. Potentiality beyond what is known, or what can be known or calculated as being known by the inner critic, because the inner critic is very limited to what has been and what is observable in the now. Your inner voice will always speak to you, your higher self voice will always speak to you of potentiality that is beyond what is known. It will always speak to you of what can be, if you trust yourself enough to surrender to it. And that is really something that is part of the void, the womb of cosmic consciousness, what I call connecting with the Great Mother. You could call it connecting with Source, you can call it connecting with God. It's all part of the same energy. It is the void of the unknown that holds pure consciousness, the template of pure essence that can become form at any given time based on our choosing of the reality that we are creating. This is pure consciousness. This is where the availability of infinite now moments of timelines of new realities, inspired creation, this emerges from this void. And it emerges from within us deliberate intent to design a reality free from lack, free from exclusion, ripe with an infinite array of possibilities that are available to you at any given moment, to experience the deep soul satisfaction of inclusion instead of exclusion from the all that is. So, given what I've just told you, given what I have just shared with you, what feelings, what beliefs, what actions or behaviors are you engaging in that are either self-affirming or self-negating? Which voice are you listening to? The self-negating voice of the inner critic? Are you allowing that to run the show? Are you allowing ego to kick and scream and cause tantrums and it needs to be heard, and you're placating that voice? Or are you listening to the voice of the higher self? Are you allowing the noise of the ego to just kind of settle by not leaning into the voice of the inner critic, by not leaning into the voice of ego, what you're allowing it to do is just kind of settle, because it loves attention. It loves seeking out external evidence. If you are paying enough attention to it, saying, okay, well, prove it to me. Show me how much I'm in lack. Show me how much I'm in scarcity. And the ego will find plenty of ways to do that for you. On the other side of that, if you are leaning into the voice of the higher self, and it may be this quiet little whisper underneath all the kicking and the screaming and the tantrum throwing of the ego, it might be this very small, meek voice underneath all that, but it is there. Because remember, the inner critic is just running programming of the ego that is superimposed over the higher self. The higher self is always there. So you get to choose. Self-negating, inner critic, self-affirming, higher self. And when you are actively choosing to listen to the voice of the higher self, you find moments of lucid and clear and beautiful and transformative inspiration. You find moments of revelation. You find moments of extreme, deep soul satisfaction, joy, the feeling of possibility, and knowing that even if you can't put a name or a vision to something that's coming, you can feel it. This is the place of pure creation. It can't exist or come from anywhere else. Hi, Zibo. Hi from London. Hello, hello. So begin to frame what you're doing, what you're thinking about, what you're feeling on a daily basis, based on, and don't go into thinking that this is duality and doing this, because it is a bridge as a way for you to close the gap in between viewing or filtering everything from duality consciousness by simply looking at right now, am I choosing self-negating feelings, thoughts, beliefs, actions, or am I choosing self-affirming thoughts, feelings, beliefs, actions? And once you start leaning more into the self-affirming, because it is your free will choice to do so, you will find that it opens up infinite little fragmentary pathways and passageways of opportunities, situations. You start seeing more of those breadcrumbs of abundance that you can follow. And it'll lead you on a pathway and open up passageways that you didn't even think existed. And this can only and ever come from listening to the voice of the higher self. It will never show up listening to the voice of the inner critic. So I hope this has been helpful for you. There's 2 ways to explore this if you want to go further with this. We're talking about this quite a bit in the Money Lab, which starts next Saturday. I've got information in there from that. And I'm doing some one-on-one sessions with Mother Creatrix Energy. So if you are interested in that, that is another way to work with me. And you can check that out on my website, catherineMassel.com/workwithme. So I want to bid you a beautiful, beautiful Ascension Assistance Sunday. Thanks for joining me, and love and peace.